Greetings, fellow YouTubers. It is I, Perfect Chaos 104, and I welcome you to my first ever video. Picture this. You see a game in a store, physical or digital, that's new and or on sale, and you think to yourself, I need to get this! But then something else comes up and you end up not touching the game for several months or even years. It's a common occurrence, and I'm sure there are some of you that have done this so many times that you develop a backlog of games that you haven't even started. And sadly, this also applies to me. However, while looking through my collection, I've come across a few games that made me think, do I have the time to play this now? So for this video, I'll be looking through my backlog and going over the games I'm most hesitant to start playing. Whether it's because the game seems really difficult, there's a lot to do in it, or I've heard some bad things about it, etc. Although to be clear, there are only a few games where that last one applies, and I'll make it clear which ones it applies to. So first off, I should say that I do intend on playing all these games eventually, otherwise why would I have bought them? It'll just take me a while to get around to them. And despite the ordering of the list, it's not necessarily the order I'll end up playing the games in. Also, I've decided to exclude game compilations from this list, such as Castlevania, Contra, Amnesia, Mega Man Zero CX, Mario 3D All-Stars, etc., since including multiple games in one package seems like an unfair advantage. And for one last note, these games are all available on Nintendo consoles since those are the only ones I currently have access to. But given we've experienced a couple store closures recently, I've still got quite a few options to choose from. So without further ado, commence the countdown! Number 10, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond. Starting off with a bit of an infamous one. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl have gained a reputation as one, technically two, of the most divisive Pokemon games in recent memory. Whether it's the slightly off-putting chibi art style, slippery controls, particularly in tight corridors, potential glitches that could soft-lock you, sudden difficulty spikes towards the end, or just people wishing there was more in it. But despite that, I have played through Shining Pearl, and I honestly didn't have as bad an experience as others have. I hardly encountered any glitches, had a good time going through the Sinnoh region again, for the most part, and although I had to grind quite a bit for the Pokemon League, I did manage to beat it on my first try. Not to mention that exploring the Grand Underground is pretty fun, digging for rare items, and especially catching several different Pokemon in the hideaways. But still, I can see the flaws of this game, which is why I haven't played Brilliant Diamond yet. For the record, I bought the Double Pack on launch, which is why I have both games. As for why I still want to play it, that's mainly because there are achievements in Pokemon Home that involve playing both games. Specifically with completing the BDSP Pokédex and transferring Dialga, which is why it's at the bottom of the list. I'll get around to it eventually, but at least this diamond won't be as rough as some of the later entries. Number 9, Undertale. Now don't get me wrong, I love the contents of this game. The music is amazing, the story and characters are great, and heck, I've even cosplayed as Sans on multiple occasions. But naturally, that's the main reason why I haven't played this game yet. I wasn't able to buy this game until it came onto the Switch in 2018, and by that time I was already very familiar with the contents of the game, due to watching a few Let's Plays, comic dubs, and especially Undertale the Musical by a man on the internet. So essentially, I've already experienced the game without actually playing it. And besides, if I want to get the true pacifist or genocide endings, the game's bad and good endings respectively, I'd have to play through the game twice since the game locks you into the neutral ending for your first playthrough. Not to mention I've heard the game can be quite grindy no matter which route you take, so I'd likely want to space out the two run-throughs in order to make it feel a bit less repetitive. Although maybe now that I finally have a YouTube channel, I could do my own Let's Play of it, and maybe even reference the musical during it. But until then, this game will just have to stay on my Switch, all by its bonesome. Come on, it's Undertale. I had to include at least one skeleton pun. Number 8, Hades. I'm a big fan of Supergiant Games' previous titles, Bastion and Transistor, but at the same time, those games were pretty linear beat-em-ups. When it comes to roguelites, particularly ones that make you start from the beginning if you die, I'm admittedly not as good at those. I mean, I've played the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games and played through Flint Hook before, which is more of a platforming roguelite, but aside from those and a few ones of Skull the Hero Slayer where I didn't get far at all, I don't have much experience with the genre. Additionally, from what I've seen, the potential power-ups you can get along your run are almost always random, at least at first, which can lead to problems if I get a new weapon and have to learn how it works while I take on a huge wave of enemies, as an example. Of course, I would still like to play Hades because the game looks gorgeous, but it would most likely take a lot of time for me to make significant progress with it. Number 7, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Now, aside from horror games and shooters, sports games are mainly my least played genre. I mean, I played SSX3 as a kid, and my dad roped me into playing a few rounds of Madden football games, but still not my forte. That being said, I have heard good things about the Pro Skater series. Cool tricks to do to earn points, diverse locations, and some pretty funny scenarios, particularly in the 4th game, and only a few of which get Tony killed. So when I saw it for sale at a convention for $10, I just had to get it. Although since buying it, I have heard from some people that this game can be pretty unforgiving for new players, which is putting me off playing the game. But I don't think that makes the game impossible to new players, so I guess it'll just be a tough learning curve. And if I can get past that, hopefully it's mostly smooth skating afterwards. You know, aside from the times where Tony gets killed. Number 6, Donkey Kong 64. Ah yes, one of the biggest collectathon games ever made, especially for its time. I managed to get this game off the Wii U eShop since I don't have a Nintendo 64 because I knew it would be a worthwhile experience. But still, alongside the massive levels, the sheer amount of collectibles would be daunting for pretty much anyone. On top of the 5 different playable cons, there are around 80 total mini-games in the game, and roughly 3,000 total collectibles. Needless to say, when I do get around to this game, it's going to take quite a while to get it done. And in order to do so, I'll probably need some convincing. I am terribly sorry, feel free to boo in the comments. Number 5, Xenoblade Chronicles X. From one game that was considered massive for its time to a much more recent one, Xenoblade X is one of the biggest games on the Wii U. Not only that, but you're eventually able to traverse the massive open world in a giant mech suit. Those aspects were pretty much the selling points for me, so when I came across the physical version, I sprained to get it. But still, with such a huge game, it'll take me some time to find the right time to play through it. Not to mention I've heard that the story isn't as good as the first game, so that's another docked point. But even then, I'll be keeping my eyes on this extra special game. Number 4, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask 3D. As I mentioned before, I never owned a Nintendo 64, so I never got a chance to play the Zelda games on the console. However, I recently came into possession of the 3DS remakes for both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. And while I've heard great things about Ocarina of Time 3D, Majora's Mask 3D apparently has some problems. I mean, the completionist said it was pretty good, but from what I heard elsewhere, they've changed the game to be more welcoming to newcomers, which could be a good thing for me. Nerfed some abilities, such as less powerful swimming and Goron rolling being harder to control, and changed the bosses to be overall worse than they were originally. So yeah, aside from BDSP, this is probably the game on the list I've heard the most negative things about, which definitely makes me hesitant to play it. But perceived negativity was only one factor for this list, and I feel the last 3 games emphasize more of the other 2 factors. Number 3, Sin and Punishment Star Successor. I've definitely heard good things about this game over the years from quite a few YouTubers, including intense action and some wild bosses, so when I found a copy at a used game store, I couldn't resist picking it up. However, that's actually the main reason why I'm hesitant to play this game. You know, aside from my lack of experience with the shooters and the intense difficulty, of course. Since I bought it at a used game store, I'm worried that the disc might be scratched, meaning I wouldn't be able to finish it or even get far in it. This has actually happened before with a couple of SpongeBob games I bought at the same store, so I've had previous experience with it happening. Although Sin and Punishment's price was about $50, so the chances of a crash are less likely, but the possibility is still there. Number 2, Zack and Wiki Quest for Barbarossa's Treasure. This is another title that I've heard good things about from a few YouTubers, great puzzles and some neat Easter eggs, and I felt like getting it on the Wii U eShop would be the only chance I'd be able to get it. But to explain my hesitation this time, if I could quote one of those YouTubers, Zack and Wiki is by far the most hair-pulling, teeth-clenching, sweat-inducing puzzle game I have ever played. Credit to CGS001. Necessary items being obscure to figure out, sensitive motion controls, and very little time to solve the puzzles before your untimely death. Needless to say, I'm probably going to have a hard time with this game when I eventually get around to it, so I'm fine with holding off on it. Before we get to number 1, here are a few honorable mentions. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Another game that has a lot of content to it, with a huge campaign containing several missions where you can play as different characters from Zelda Breath of the Wild. Although I've heard it's best to tackle it in short bursts rather than to tackle it all at once, so that's a bit of a relief. I'm just glad it isn't required before playing Tears of the Kingdom. Pokemon Yellow and Crystal. These were the only main series Pokemon games I was able to get for the 3DS Virtual Console before it closed down. And while I think they would still be a fun experience, I've heard several people mention the parts of these games that have aged poorly. Slow movement speed, limited item storage, countless glitches, etc. Granted, most of these are for just Gen 1, but Gen 2 isn't completely free of problems. But then again, those home achievements look pretty enticing. Penny Punching Princess. Okay, so I've technically started this game before, got about an hour in and had some fun with it, but the next time I opened the game, I was speeding through the starting menus, didn't know that new game would be the first selection, accidentally chose it, and poof, my save data was gone. There was no, are you sure you want to start a new game? Or, doing this will delete your current save data. One misclick, and my run was gone in a second. So according to the game, I haven't started it yet, but at the same time, I'll hold off on playing it for a bit so the experience feels fresh. Number 1. Animal Crossing New Leaf. And here it is. The ultimate time sink. I admittedly never got into this series until I tried out the Pocket Camp mobile game for a bit when it first came out. But once I got New Horizons, I fell in love with the relaxing gameplay, charming characters, and tons of stuff to collect. But over the years, I kept hearing that New Leaf was still the best game in the series, so I couldn't help but get it off the 3DS shop when I couldn't find a physical version. Yet despite all those positives I mentioned, I know that once I do start the game, I'll never be able to stop playing it. Not only would it take a long time to finish, let alone complete, but I would be pressured to check back into the game every day, lest weeds take over and villagers lose interest. And considering I already have a couple games I need to check in daily with in the form of New Horizons and Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, adding a third one would definitely eat up more of my free time. So before I open the floodgates by turning this new leaf over, I figure I'll get at least a few more games, or at least 3DS games, off my backlog first. Well, that's it for my first ever video, and if you have any games you're hesitant to start playing, let me know in the comments below. Also, feel free to leave a like if you like this video, and maybe even subscribe. This has been Perfect Chaos 104, hopefully saying you haven't seen the last of me.